Hi, and welcome to Cúirt. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Sasha de Boyle, Director of the Cúirt International Festival of Literature, and I'm really excited to be introducing you to our first ever digital festival. I hope you enjoyed this event, and if you do, why not take a moment to see what else we have in store online at cúirt.ie. All our events will be broadcast live until the 25th of April, but if you want to watch or listen again, you can find them all online on our website, our SoundCloud, or our YouTube channel. Please feel free to join the conversation on social media. We'll be using the hashtag Cúirt2020 across Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram throughout the weekend. If you'd like to make a donation to support Cúirt, you can do so at cúirt.ie/support us. And after the event, we'll be sending out a post-event survey and would be very grateful if you were able to fill this in. We can't be there with you, but we hope we can bring a little of the Cúirt spirit to you wherever you are in the world. Thank you.
We have two Galway writers today, Alan McMonagle and Mary Costello, on their second novels. The Guardian described The River Capture by Mary Costello as a beautifully modulated novel about a Joyce obsessive whose life is stalled, while the Irish Times referred to the irreverent comedy, the infectious portrayal of brazen optimism, at the heart of Laura Cassidy's Walk of Fame by Alan McMonagle. Mary's first novel, an award winner, called Academy Street, came out of a story in her short story collection, The China Factory. The novel follows the character of Tess Lohan, from her 1940s childhood in the west of Ireland to an adult life spent in New York City, right up to and past the watershed of 9/11. The arc of her current novel, The River Capture, is rather different. Instead of the voyage out and the emigrant experience, Costello's new protagonist, Luke O'Brien, comes back to the family home in rural Waterford from Dublin at a specific point of crisis in his life. There's danger and dark comedy in the fiction of Alan McMonagle. There's also a little bit of crazy. It's there in the titles of his two short story collections, Liar Liar and Psychotic Episodes. It's there in his first novel, Ithaca, in which an 11-year-old called Jason lives in a fantasy world more real to him than reality itself. Alan's new creation, Laura Cassidy, is a fantasist on a whole other level. Mary, would you read from The River Capture, and would you introduce the scene for us?
I will. Thank you, Paula, and thank you for having me at the first Cúirt Digital Festival. So, Luke O'Brien is a 34-year-old teacher who has left Dublin, left after the breakup of a relationship, and returned to rural Ireland to his home on the bend of a river. And at this point, it's evening time, and he's standing at the river, which is a tidal river. He walks on. Any minute now, the tide will turn at the inch and begin its outward journey. He would like to arrest time at that moment of turning, witness the instant the change occurs and the current swirls and turns and begins to slide back towards the sea. He tilts his head to listen closely. The turn of the tide must be discernible to certain creatures. The low liquid decibels audible to the ears of dippers, maybe, and otters and swans. A sound discernible to trees and plants too, the kind of thing Joyce might have heard. He turns and looks downriver. In the dusk, the river melds with the bank and the woodlands. He can make out the old chicken factory in the distance. A time will come when it will be a roofless edifice, with jackdaws flying in under steel girders, the ground littered with puny bones and old manure, a feather floating in the air. He walks on. He really should move back to Dublin. Dublin. In the magical chaos after Josie's death, he had returned to his job in Belvedere. Then, slowly, over a year, he began to suffer a progressive erosion of the spirit, a steady depletion of reserves. Without Maeve, he lost the run of himself, and the city became a place of freedom and temptation and excess. He drank copiously, spent with abandon, sated old appetites. New desires too. On a staff night out in the dark corner of a nightclub, the young, newly appointed maths teacher, Oisin Kelly, with his fair to reddish hair and delicate cheekbones and tired, misty eyes, put a hand on Luke's arm and looked steadily into his eyes. In the late-night heady mix of dim lights and music and alcohol, he thought Oisin beautiful. Oisin smiled and leaned in and kissed him on the mouth, and he kissed him back and then panicked. "I'm not gay," he said. Oisin smiled and shrugged. "So? That's the truth, I swear. If I was gay, I'd have been out at 15. Jesus Christ, he thought. What am I? Half gay? It was true. If he were gay, he would have been out at 15. He would not have cared. He is his father's son. The truth at all costs, regardless of convention. He looked at Oisin, at one of his eyes, then the other, at the smiling mouth, and he kissed him again. Desire rising in the tongue and the mouth, lust in the groin. Physical love bred out of spirit and intellect and beauty. Walking in the small hours through empty streets to Oisin's place, the bawdy talk, the wicked laughter, the tender touch of Oisin's hand, his lips, the tawny hair on his arms in the dawn light. And then the walk home, alone, in daylight, and the shock, the sickly realization of what he had done. But the next day he returned to Oisin, and to days and nights of pure joy and laughter and ecstasy, moments of love and of feeling newly born, followed by hours of self-loathing, fear, panic at being spotted entering a gay bar. He began to admire men's bodies, their bare arms, square shoulders, round, tight backsides. He began to dress differently, to take care of his skin. Mother of God. When he was with Oisin, it wasn't tawdry, but natural. Just sitting together meant something. He didn't know how to describe it. Why do we have to be one thing or the other, he thinks. Why do we have to be anything? Does it matter who we kiss, who fills us with longing? Does it matter who puts what where? The thing he had not foreseen, not expected, was the purity of feeling, the integrity of feeling he had for men. Way beyond the physical, beyond mere possession. To do with the ease and affinity between men, the protectiveness, the feeling that he could say anything and do anything, and nothing had to be explained. One of the first signs of the end of the world, he read once, when men marry men. For a few years it was where the heat was, at the source, the nub, the core of a man, the need to touch and be touched there. He had always loved human touch, human skin, human smells. In the 9 months he was with Oisin, he oscillated between moments of searing shame and fear and uncertainty, and the thrill of new adventure, the feeling of opening doors, flinging up windows. Extreme feeling this, living from the heart of the sensorium. He read widely about sexuality, mulled over his own, acted out his craven fantasies. Alone he contemplated the feminine in himself, and, stirred by desire at the thought of being part woman, he massaged his nipples, ran a finger along his scrotal scar, the vestigial seam of a fetal vagina, before its folds fused and his prenatal self became male. He imagined his own labia, a tight cervix, his unborn womb an ocean of fecundity. He detected a sensitive and feminine element in himself and suspected that, at certain times of the month, he still possessed traces of a rudimentary menstrual cycle that, prone to this pull of celestial bodies, affected his entire organism. The pendulum swung back. He could not bear the thought of being without woman. The carnal pleasures, the emotional intimacies, the feeling of completeness. But the door had opened, and he could not unknow all he now knew, or unfeel all he felt. He has a theory that the current states of male and female are transitional, intermediary, that mankind is still evolving, and that human evolution will eventually culminate in a single form that contains and integrates both male and female elements in a sophisticated hermaphroditic self. He is convinced the evolutionary pressure is increasing and change is imminent, and he finds the idea of such change philosophically and aesthetically pleasing.
Thanks, Mary. Alan, can you read from Laura Cassidy's Walk of Fame for us?
I will indeed, yeah. Thanks very much, Paula, and thanks a lot to Sasha and all the team at Cúirt. Delighted to be a part of the Cúirt 2020 digital festival. Kudos to everyone involved for making it happen. So Laura Cassidy's Walk of Fame, briefly, it's probably best described as a comedy of aspiration, pitted against self-sabotaging hope and blind optimism. The title character, Laura Cassidy, young woman, budding actress in pursuit of a dream. And as is often the way of dreams, it's a pursuit that very quickly veers off piste. I thought I'd read a chapter from quite early on. The chapters are bite-sized. And this chapter will provide a glimpse both of Laura, the little girl with a dream to pursue, and later on, Laura, the wannabe actress on a mission. So here goes. When I was little, I used to lie on the floor in my bedroom and write letters. Dear Gloria Swanson, my name is Laura Cassidy, and this is a letter to congratulate you on your wonderful movie career. I think Sunset Boulevard is one of the very best movies, and I thought you were fantastic in it. So fantastic that at the end of a private screening, Barbara Stanwyck knelt down and kissed the hem of your skirt. When I am older, I hope to be a famous actress and take my place on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. My daddy says you get 10,000 fan letters a week. Well, this week you'll get 10,001, and I hope you get to read it before your eyes get tired. Thanks to you, I am going to be a star. More than anything, I want you to know that. I would sign the letters from admiring little me and address them to the Walk of Fame in Hollywood. And whenever I had a chance, I would take them as far as Barna Woods and drop them inside the hollowed oak tree I had discovered while out walking with Daddy. It was my way of sending the letters out into the world and keeping them away from Jennifer's prying eyes, to be retrieved whenever I wanted to read over them. I kept a scrapbook in the hollowed oak tree too. I still do, inside regularly changed plastic bags. I even keep a knife, because you never know. Into the scrapbook went clippings and photos and useful details about all my favourites. How they were discovered, memorable roles, the precise location of their star name on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, what their real names were. Reminders of happy times I like to peek through every now and then. And onto the front cover, in large curvy writing, I slapped the title of my scrapbook, a title I knew Daddy would approve of. Laura Cassidy's Walk of Fame. It's a hop, skip and a jump from the medical centre to the town hall. This is where Chaos Theatre are based until the new theatre opens. Up the concrete steps, through the double doors, and I swing sharp right, avoiding reception and the fire-breathing dragon, aka Camilla the Hun, who doesn't appear to be on duty today anyway. Up the stairs, past the rehearsal studio, and on into the coffee bar, where I can already see the person who I assume is the new director, at the window table, along with some of the new crew. Emily is behind the counter. She's the one I like. The dragon on reception seldom gives me so much as the time of day. Not so Emily. She has a nice smile and empathy. Put her arms around the suffering world, Emily would. Quiet as a tinkering mouse, I slide up to the counter. Hi, Emily. Laura, you gave me a fright. Who? Little me? I wouldn't scare a ladybird, Emily. I wouldn't say boo to a tinkering mouse. I half turn around so that I am facing the tables, all of them unoccupied, except for the one by the window. Hey, Emily, Is that him? Yeah, that's him. I take a good look in the direction of where he is seated. He's cute, a bit square on the shoulders, and he needs the tip of his nose lopped off. Cute, though. If you say so, Laura. I wonder has he a nice speaking voice? You look tired, Emily. Let me cover for you for an hour. I don't think I can do that, Laura. Poppycock, Emily. Go on, take a break. Go and smoke a pack of cigarettes. Go and call your favourite boyfriend. Tell him you've no underwear on today. You never lose it, Laura, she says, laughing, and gets busy with the coffee machine. I return my gaze to the table she is preparing coffee for. There are 5 of them. The new director and his theatre crew, bunched around the one table, sipping coffees, talking theatre. Behind the bar, Emily fills and sets up a fresh tray of coffees. I am all set to grab a hold of it and take it over to the crew, while running through my head how I will introduce myself, when he gets up and walks over to the counter. Hi, I say. Hi, he says back, all furrow-browed, broody and deep-voiced with it, precisely how theatre directions of intent should be. I'll take those coffees. You're in the thick of it over there, I see. You're the new director, aren't you? I'm Laura. I'm an actress. An actress? That's great. Yes, it is, isn't it? Might I have seen you in anything? Oh, you know, I haven't done much recently, but not for lack of wanting to. It's my health. Your health? It hasn't been the best of late. I won't bore you with the details. Well, let me wish you a speedy recovery. Now, if you'll excuse me, I hear you're planning a new production. Yes, we are. What's this it's called? Oh, wait. It's a secret, isn't it? Well, I suppose I understand. You can't reveal anything. It's okay. Don't tell me. I'll have fun working it out. I see. Well, if you'll... Would I be correct in saying the movie version starred Vivian Leigh? He smiles at that, but doesn't fully give it away. And next year is the 70th anniversary. Yes. That's a good reason to put it on. We think so. The black and white movie version was made in 1951. Actually, I didn't know that. Did I tell you I'm an actress? You did. And my daddy. Around these parts, he was a very well-known actor. Good to know. Well, it was. I suppose when all is said and done, what I'm really trying to say is that I've been waiting for a suitable part to come along. You know, a part that has the ability to reach out and grab my heart and mind. I'm really interested in your new production. This could be the one I've been waiting for. Well, we're putting out a casting call, quite soon, actually. Here, you can read all about it in the paper. Why don't you come in and show us what you've got? Oh, I will, I say, placing my hand on the copy of the advertiser he has indicated on the countertop. I will, and thank you so much. I'd better get back. Of course you better, and don't let me stop you. And thanks again for this opportunity. You won't regret it, that I promise you. Well, you're welcome, Lorraine, but you know it's Laura. I beg your pardon? My name, it's Laura, Laura, Laura. Okay, I think I've got that, though I will probably change it, you know, when the time comes. Well, that all sounds great, Laura. I look forward to seeing you at the audition. Me too. And like I say, Stephen, it's okay if I call you Stephen. Thanks. Like I say, thank you for the opportunity. He rejoins the others. They turn collectively toward me, and I give them a friendly wave. Oh, I have a good feeling about this. As soon as I clapped eyes on him, I knew he was my kind of director. Not like the disaster we had before, with his big head and fake voice, shiny teeth too. Never trust a lad with shiny teeth. It won't be long now. Soon I will be part of their little gatherings, swapping theatre ideas, offering my suggestions to their eager ears. It's going to be fun, isn't it, Laura? Indeed it is, Laura. Indeed it is. That's it.
I have to say, I find Laura Cassidy slightly frightening, but I'm going to come back to you on that. Um,
Fair.
Mary, maybe it's the way you read. Mary, I want to start with you. As I said earlier, there are a few contrasts between novels number one and two, not surprising. I'm guessing they were very different books to write. Is that true?
Yes, they were. First of all, the second one took way longer than the first one. The first one I think I wrote in about a year and a half or 2 years, and this one, River Capture, I think took 5 or 6 years. But yes, very different characters, obviously, very different setting. You know, as you said, Tess moves from rural Ireland to New York, and here we have Luke moving from Dublin to the country, his home in the country, and moving from an outer life really to an inner life as well. Much of his action, you know, he's had a fairly vibrant life in Dublin, and he's moving to a quieter time in his life. So yes, in timing and setting, there in time scale as well, River Capture covers the whole life. Initially, the River Capture was going to concern Ellen, the woman, Luke's aunt, an older woman, and it was going to be her life story, which, you know, in many ways would have been more of a piece with Academy Street. But as I was writing it, it became evident that Luke was the central character. He sort of emerged, and it proceeded from there then.
There you go. You've neatly answered the question I was going to ask you. I'm always fascinated where novels start for writers. So you had started with Ellen, and then it evolved, or Luke evolved into focus, the central focus.
Yes, and I had the River Capture as well. The image, you know, sometimes one starts with an image, sometimes it's a character. So I had both in a way. But yes, Luke, I had the character of Luke, and you know, he's very different from Tess in Academy Street in that he's much stronger. I think he's single-minded. He's quite unabashed. He's a very well-read man. He's 34 years old, a teacher, but reads widely and deeply and has lots of interests, whether that's science or, you know, nature. He's really, I suppose, he is trying to live the examined life. And he's also a little bit of an outsider there because he doesn't fit the normal. He's quite unconventional in ways. And like his hero, Leopold Bloom, he is, as I said, a little bit of an outsider.
Alan, where did Laura Cassidy start for you then?
Oh gosh. Well, generally as a writer, I tend to hear things before I see them. So Laura definitely began as a voice, you know, and it's a voice that didn't leave me alone. A voice that began to acquire flesh and blood and limbs and so forth. And yeah, as soon as she got arms and legs, she was on the hoof, in pursuit of a dream, and very much began to assert herself and behave in unpredictable ways. I suppose I should say misbehave. And I suppose when a character starts to misbehave on you, that's when things start to get interesting, you know. So I just cut her loose on the streets of Galway, and off she goes.
She's a very strong voice. And I want to ask you as well about both your novels. The main character is drawn to a kind of fantastical world. What is it about
Yeah.
myth making? You know, what is it about those alternate realities that fascinates you as the writer?
Yeah, I suppose the alternate worlds. I suppose the first thing to say is that I see them as imagined worlds and invented places. I suppose places for my troubled characters to seek refuge in. Like when we first meet Laura, for example, there's very much a gap between where she is and where she wants to be, and that gap, it's a place of invention and dream and imagination. I suppose one thing that the novel is attempting to emphasize or explore is the power of dream and invention for those in the world who are more vulnerable than others. You know, maybe have a go at exploring that fine line that exists between the language of dreams and everyday. I, I think that's where in both novels, as you point out, I think that's where it comes from. Yeah.
And why choose the Hollywood of Barbara Stanwyck and Lana Turner? Why that era in particular?
Oh gosh, there's probably a clutch of reasons, personal and aesthetic. I mean, as far as Laura is concerned, I mean, this seed to become a movie star, to go all the way, the West End in London, Broadway in New York, Tinseltown, Hollywood, all the way to having her name literally etched into a name on this so-called Walk of Fame. It's a seed that's planted inside her by her father, very, very early in life, when she is plonked in front of the TV set, watching these old movies in his enthusiastic company. And I think she is just instantly spellbound by 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 the characters and the language and the dialogue that is literally playing out in front of her. This era of the silver screen with its tough talking wise guys and the femme fatales, the Lana Turners, the Barbara Stanwicks, the Gloria Swansons, the Veronica Lakes, the fact that they're able to give these tough talking wise guys every bit as good as they get. I think she's enthralled to this from a very early time in her life, and she's infused with it, from the get go, really. And of course, I'm tapping into a very personal childhood memory as well. I remember well, my parents' ongoing attempts to curb my restlessness. They would, they'd plonk me in front of the TV. Inevitably, it was a Saturday night, quite late, the BBC, and yeah, these black and white movies, just being piped in. And straight away, I was just transported into another world. I mean, I really love the energy and the atmosphere of these black and white films, and the low angles and the long shadows and the high windows and plumes of smoke drifting into the darkness. And again, the language and the dialogue and the characters. I mean, I love that when two of these people spoke to each other, one of them always seemed to come off second best. I mean, there was a tension there that was instant, and yeah, I was fascinated by it. And I've just transferred all this onto Laura.
Mm. One of the things that the river capture and Laura Cassidy's Walk of Fame have in common, I think, is the fact that landscape matters, the setting really matters. So, Alan, if you could talk me through, Ithaca is set in a Midlands town, probably not that far away from your own native Longford, but Galway really matters here. We're on the streets of Galway with Laura. You're talking about the Town Hall Theatre, the Pier, Nemo's, places all of us who've been to Galway know. Could you say just a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, as you say, I think it was set in a fictitious Irish Midlands town, but the cluster and the horizons within the story, the narrative landscape, they were very claustrophobic, and I just had to get to the coast for novel number two. I needed to be surrounded by water, be it river, canal, seafront, etc. And I've lived in Galway on and off more or less since I did my leaving cert. So the streets and the hinterland of what would become Laura Cassidy, I mean, they're just seared into my subconsciousness. And the streets of Galway, especially the older streets with its bars and cafes, and where colourful characters tend to loiter, and of course the waterways, the river, harbour, canal, and the seafront. These are routes that I always seek out myself when I'm just myself out on the hoof. And I think it was inevitable that when I put Restless Laura out and about and on a mission, that it was inevitable that she was going to cover the same ground. I mean, one of my own personal favorite chapters in the book is Laura Giggs as a walking tour guide in between acting jobs. My own favorite chapter is when she takes the tourists on her own version of a Galway walking tour. You know, it's a version that contains a lot more embellishment and gore and shall we say violence than possibly the original versions, if that's possible. But she is in her element performing for these groups, and yeah, it allowed me as a writer to cover territory that I'm very familiar with and that I adore.
Mary, landscape matters in the river capture as well, of course. Why gives the natural world such prominence?
First of all, I suppose I better explain the river capture itself. It is, Luke lives on the bend of a river. His land is situated on the bend of a river. And a river capture is a geological phenomenon where one river takes over the route and the riverbed of another river. It would have happened millions of years ago, an ancient event where one river drops down onto an older, ancient, dry riverbed. So in actual fact, then the river changes course entirely. It's diverted. It's pirated by another river. It's an act of theft. And Luke sees all this, and he sees it as a cataclysmic event in the river's existence. He thinks about it as a rupture in the river's course, if you like, a disruption, and maybe even a wound in the landscape. And he is sensitive to, I suppose, the hidden reality of nature around him. He is hyper alert to the mystery of nature. He thinks almost of the river as being sentient, and that this great cataclysmic event in the river's life as a wound, really, an ancient pain. And he often wonders as well whether the whole district around, he lives near a town and the town has been quite neglected. There's a pall over it in ways, and Luke is very porous to all of those vibes. I think many people are, you hear of people going to Auschwitz and feeling the darkness of that territory. And we've all been in places where where places give off vibes. And certainly Luke is the kind, he is porous to those sort of vibrations from the landscape. And he wonders whether the whole area around the town and the neglected youth, there's a lot of depression and addiction and abuse in the area. And he wonders if the whole landscape has felt the repercussions of this ancient wound in the river, and that the ghost pains are still there almost. So he is alert to those sort of little moments and vibrations. So it is important to him.
Mm-hmm. He spends a lot of time thinking about the dead, doesn't he? Is he more haunted than most of us, do you think? Or is it because he's in a kind of hiatus in his own life that he has time and space maybe to allow these thoughts to come to bear?
Yes, he is exactly in a hiatus. He's left a fairly vibrant life in Dublin and returned to a fairly quiet life. So he is in a sort of a liminal space before Ruth, the love interest, enters. But I think that for many people, for many of us, it is in those quiet moments, when we maybe withdraw. Sometimes it's voluntary, sometimes it's an involuntary withdrawal, we've no choice. And it is often in those quiet times that psychological shifts happen in us, things that we might not necessarily welcome. I think the unconscious is working at all times, and sometimes we're forced into a kind of hibernation or psychologically dormant time. And Luke, at the beginning of the novel, is certainly in this, and he has lost relatives in the previous 5 years. So he is, I suppose, at that crossroads thinking of mortality. But I think he is a thinker anyway, and a lot of the book happens in his mind. It is, the life, the inner life. I don't think of that as being in any way quiet. I think of it as being very vibrant, and his inner life is full of turmoil and action in a way. It's and I think we probably in our society, in most societies in the West, we value extroversion, we value action, and it's harder to value the inner life. It's harder to measure it. So we value more the outer, what you can see, how people look, what they own, how they can, how articulate they are. It's harder to put a measure on the inner life. So he may look as if he's not that active, but in actual fact, lots is happening.
Rivers, of course, have their place in Joyce's work, and Joyce certainly has his place in this novel. Do you want to say a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. He is a great love of mine, and no matter, I think for writers, certainly for me, whatever is occupying me and preoccupying me makes its way. It seeps, as Alan was saying there earlier, it seeps in and bleeds into the work. And I had been rereading a lot of Ulysses around the time I was working this novel, and it certainly it couldn't help but make its way in. If I had left it out in some ways, it wouldn't have been entirely honest, because I was consumed with Ulysses and Joyce for years, and it would have been, I would have had to self-censor in many ways to leave it out. But yes, Joyce means a lot to me. I would have studied Ulysses and Dubliners and portrait in college, and over the years, maybe not returned to him as much, certainly not to Ulysses. And then maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I started rereading Ulysses. But over the years, I would have read Ellman's biography and all Joyce's letters, and Brenda Maddox and Anthony Burgess and all of them. And I love Joyce, the man, as much as the work in a way. But yes, Bloom, for Luke, I think Bloom is a touchstone. He is a man that Luke finds certain affinities with. He's a man who's very sensual, who's a pacifist, a feminist, a lover of humanity. And in many ways, Ulysses is a manifesto for kindness and compassion. And these are things that, disturb Luke when he sees injustice or when he sees suffering, whether that's human or animal suffering. These are the things that occupy him, as they occupied Bloom. So Luke, for Bloom, is he's certainly a touchstone, and he is a kind of a soul guide for Luke as well. And both of them, in a way, are on a journey. Late at night, Bloom returns home, and later in the novel, we have Luke having a sort of a homecoming in a way with the river. But Joyce is, for me, a genius. Faulkner said about Joyce that he's electrocuted by divine fire. And that's certainly the attraction for me. His supreme intelligence, his refined feeling. We read a lot about Joyce's life. We know about the recklessness with money, the drinking and everything. But he was a very gentle soul with incredibly polite manners and very refined feeling, and very vulnerable too, afraid of dogs and thunder, and all of those things greatly endear me to him. I never gave it a second thought, when I was that he wouldn't appear with Luke, because like with Ellen, he was so present in my mind. He had to be there, he had to make his way in.
Very good. Of course, we're talking about water here a lot, and Alan, Galway is a city defined by water, just been saying, but part of Laura's trauma, in a sense, is the fact that the death of her father, and that's related to the pier. How much is your novel about grief and trauma, would you say?
Yeah, that's right. It's the thing with Laura is that she loses this key person in her life at quite an early stage in her own life. She's very young. She also witnesses his death. And crucially as well, it's actually on a day when she's just gotten some good news herself. She's just bagged the lead in the school play, and so excited is she that she hurries out to the pier to break the good news with her father, the first person she wants to share this good news with. And yes, tragically, he's swept over. And I think that she has a very complicated reaction to this. And it's a reaction that, involves a fair old cocktail. I think certainly grief, trauma, but I think also there's some guilt in there. There's some denial in there. So, it's a fair old cocktail. And I don't think Laura herself is aware of the enormity of it, and certainly not how and when it's going to manifest itself. and unfortunately for Laura, when it does, I mean, it's a combination, this that's potentially going to cripple her when it matters most, and really it's her not being tuned into it via her own interior journey into high fantasy and increasing desperation that again it sort of stifles her awareness of it, and so it's going to unfortunately it's going to be her Achilles heel, at least potentially.
And of course, Laura's is the main point of view we get in the novel. She is the most unreliable narrator. And yet you convey unease at every turn about her version of events. It's a kind of high wire act, I imagine, to achieve as a writer. I find it hypnotizing as a reader. It really lures us on because there's a dissonance. We know something's not right. But what does it feel like to you when you're writing it, when you're inside that?
Well, you're right. It is a high wire act, and it is difficult, and it's a challenge. But I suppose this is what you're up for, it requires soft hands, and you're going to fall off the high wire many times. It's like that Beckett thing: fall again, fail again, get up, and just fall again and again, fail again, better and better. But it's but treading that fine line between the world of the imagination and reality. That's what it becomes all the time, and I think it's success or effectiveness. It's going to be something that is felt before understood, and so to a large extent, you are progressing literally on blind faith. I mean, a mysterious kind of energy or momentum kicks in, and you've got to trust that. And if you do, things can become quite exciting. I mean, these weighty themes that occur and recur in the novel, grief and trauma and guilt and denial and so forth. I mean, I wasn't aware setting out with the story that these big themes were going to find a way into the narrative. And so my approach, I mean, I would find taking these themes head on to be something that is quite difficult. So my approach tends to be more angular and slanted, full of twists and knots, full of complications and contradictions. I mean, we're in the realm of uncertainty and confusion and chaos, and like as we know these days, more than ever, chaos is slippery and it is tricky to come at head on. And I think that as a writer, this sort of slanted approach, that's how I find my way toward the writerly X on the treasure map, if you like. That X being a moment of discovery or revelation or realization for the characters or the readers.
Speaking of high wire acts, Mary, halfway through the river capture, the straightforward narrative becomes a Q&A format. Why decide to make such a dramatic change at all, and why at that point in the story?
Yes, halfway through the story, earlier in the story, Luke has fallen in love with a young woman called Ruth, and then soon after that, there is a revelation. He discovers something that upsets the whole apple cart and pitches him into a crisis, a trauma of kinds. So at that point, there is great emotion, and he's floored, and immediately in the minutes and hours afterwards, to try and depict that kind of crisis and chaos is quite, it demands something more than ordinary language, I think. I wanted to do something that would accommodate and try and convey what he had just undergone, his crisis. I didn't find that ordinary language, writing about emotions and writing about strong feelings in ordinary language would have done him justice. He is a mathematical, scientific type, even though, of course, he has deep feelings too. But I did try out, I experiment with different things, fragmented, broken up language. But that, of course, wouldn't have been right for Luke either. So what happens in the minutes and hours immediately after his discovery is we stay very close, very tight to him, and we get a series of facts and figures, a cold clipped Q&A format that it tries to accommodate and mediate what he's going through. It is a tactic, really. It's a coping strategy on his side to deal with this crisis, and it's also a distancing mechanism. It's pushing away the feeling and being remote and trying to achieve a kind of tonal leveling, so that we're not pitched into the messy feelings of it all. So we get a catalogue of events, a catalogue and lots of lists that, and in that way we get to know a lot of his background, a lot of his thoughts, and we remain tight and close up with them for the rest of the 12 hours after that. And that Q&A format, I also is a homage to Joyce, because the second last episode of Ulysses, which is my favorite episode, is a question and answer format. And it came very naturally to me when I was experimenting and trying out different things. This was the obvious one for me, and it worked. For me, it conveys the distancing. We get to know his mind and it's very suitable because he goes through many thoughts, memories, and it's all at a sort of remove. And the novel then, of course, culminates in a kind of an encounter with the living river towards the end. And that is, in a way, Luke, you mentioned water earlier, and water is an important feature in the river capture, naturally being, composed of so much river. And for Luke has a sort of a sense that water, he's very drawn to the properties of water in all their forms. He thinks that water, where once water carried souls to the underworld, in Greek myth, now it carries human waste to the sewers and is used in nuclear reactors. He thinks of all the ways that water is used and abused and contaminated, whether it's pesticides or bleaches or plastics, and he has great pity for water, again, sensing the interconnectedness of everything. So towards the end, and this is one of the things that emerged later on, Luke, in a way, wants to witness the river's pain, and his encounter with the living river later on in the novel is that act. It's his act of bearing witness to the river's suffering and to water's suffering. And it's also a kind of homecoming from self, in the way that Bloom comes home at the end of the night in Ithaca. But yes, that device of distancing Luke from his immediate emotions was a way to accommodate them. And also, of course, it isn't just the river that is captured and it takes a sudden turn in the novel. And again, I didn't realize this fully until it was finished, but the river captures a kind of a thematic center to the novel, because Luke's life goes off track, the river goes off track, Ellen's life has gone off track in a previous generation, Ruth also, and not just Luke and the river, but the reader too is catapulted into a big change. The reader is thrown and diverted off the narrative path, as the novel is. So this had a certain symmetry when I had done it, but not obviously at the time. So yes, that device of changing track was very deliberate, and mostly to accommodate Luke's crisis and to put order on his chaos.
Speaking of lives being thrown off track, I was very struck by the Guardian review describing Luke as stalled, and we all know we're all stalled these days, one way or another, by outside circumstances. But given that Luke has a scientific bent, I just wondered what you think his thoughts would be now during this pandemic.
Well, I think he would have lots to say about it. He has theories about human evolution and about human extinction. At one point he says, we'll either boil ourselves to death with global warming and climate catastrophe, or we will become sterile. We'll be, with all the pesticides and contamination. But I think he would be greatly troubled by the loss and the suffering, and especially for the elderly, because he has a particular empathy and sympathy for elderly people. I think he would be very taken by the idea that such a tiny, virus, a thing that cannot be seen with the human eye, and in fact can't be seen with normal microscopes, such a tiny, it's just a code that attaches itself to cells, such a tiny thing could bring all of humanity to a halt, stop the gallop of humanity through the planet. I think he would find that profoundly affecting. I think he might also have a sort of a philosophical view on things and think that, we are so obsessed with our own species, and maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing, I think he might think, for all this suffering to end if humanity became extinct, whether it's through whether it's through global warming or a pandemic such as this. Would it not be the end of suffering? I think he might think. After all, man is the only species who's wreaked such havoc on himself and all the other species and all the planets and all the planet. I think it would be the end of suffering for so many. And being of the mathematical mind, I have no doubt he would calculate and quantify the amount of suffering in the world versus the amount of joy in the world and weigh them up. And I think he would find that the quotient amount of suffering in the world is greater. And maybe mankind's disappearance might not be such a bad thing. That's Luke.
Finally, Alan, before I go to an audience question, Laura's a tourist guide, as we've been saying, but there are no tourists in Galway City at the minute, something I find very hard to imagine. And the theatres are closed. So how do you think she'd be coping in an emergency like this?
Well, with her, high fantasy ambition, I suspect she'd be in her element, to be honest. I think she'd have her own YouTube channel set up already with nightly episodes. I think she would be zooming far and wide. There would be virtual cocktails and high definition histrionics and lots of virtual theatre. I think she would probably embrace it as an opportunity to try and catch the eye and ears of some cocooning hotshot director out there on the lookout for some new talent. I think I think her mantra would be, the show must go on, and all the awful stuff notwithstanding. I think she would do her best to embrace it.
She'd make it an opportunity, wouldn't she? She'd make an opportunity of it, I should say.
Yeah, I think so.
We do have an audience question, and it's for you, Mary, from Annalisa Mastronardi, PhD student in Dublin City University. And I'd say she's a Joyce fan. She wants to know if the drawing you included in the novel really came from a copy of Finnegan's Wake that you borrowed from UCD's library in 1999.
Well spotted. Yeah, it didn't, but it did come from a library copy of Finnegan's Wake, borrowed from Galway City Library. A few years ago, we moved down west from Dublin, and a lot of my books were in storage, but I needed a copy of Finnegan's Wake, and I borrowed one from Galway City Library in Augustine Street. And it was an early 1939 Faber and Faber, lovely old copy. And on the opening page, literally on the first, there's this lewd drawing, of a man's private parts, and the lewd in pen, drawn. The book was defaced, basically, and I thought, how apt. So I took several photographs of it, not thinking I might use it, and of course, a year or two later, it made its way into the novel. So I did return the book, let it be said. I returned the book to Galway Library, but that's where it came from. In the book, in my book, I gave that defaced picture to Luke. He sends it in an email to Ruth when they're communicating, and he says that it's from his copy of Finnegan's Wake, which he borrowed from UCD Library in 1999 and never gave back. Made up.
Very good, very good. Thank you both so much. It remains to me to say thank you to the audience for joining us. I'd like to thank Sasha and Dave and everyone at Cúirt for keeping this show on the road, principally Mary Costello and Alan McMonagle. Usually at this point, I'd be reminding the audience that authors are outside in the foyer about to sign novels. Instead, I'm going to remind everyone that these books are available to order online or by phone from all good bookshops, and that Mary and Alan's back catalogue is well worth reading too. Many thanks again. Stay well, and goodbye for now.